The arrival of the mysterious alien. The night sky over Lumen 5, a small human colony on the edge of the galaxy, was calm and peaceful. Stars shimmered like diamonds in the vast darkness. The colony's people were asleep, unaware that something unusual was about to happen. A fiery streak tore through the sky, moving fast. It was not a shooting star. It was a ship, damaged and spiraling out of control. The ground trembled as the spacecraft crashed into the desert outside the colony, sending a shockwave that shook nearby buildings. The colony's security alarms blared, waking everyone. Soldiers rushed to the scene, weapons ready. The leader of the security team, Captain Rayner, signaled his men to approach carefully. No one knew what had just fallen from the sky. As the dust settled, the damaged ship became visible, a sleek silver structure with glowing blue patterns running along its sides. The air around it shimmered with heat. The door of the ship hissed open, and from within, a figure staggered out. She was tall and otherworldly beautiful, her silver-white skin glowing faintly under the moonlight. Her long, flowing hair moved as if carried by an invisible breeze. She wore a form-fitting, dark suit with strange symbols running across it. But something was wrong. She clutched her chest, gasping for breath. Her golden eyes flickered, filled with something rare for an alien. Fear. She tried to speak, but her voice trembled. "Something is wrong inside me," she whispered. Before anyone could react, her legs gave way, and she collapsed onto the sand. Ethan takes a risk. Dr. Ethan Wells, a scientist from the colony, had been watching from a distance. While others held their weapons ready, he saw something different. She was not an enemy. She was in pain. Ignoring the warnings of Captain Rayner, Ethan rushed forward and knelt beside her. "Hey, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Her glowing eyes met his, and for a brief moment, Ethan saw something unexpected in them. Not just intelligence, but confusion and vulnerability. Her body trembled as she whispered again, "Something inside, changing. It's not possible." Then she lost consciousness. Ethan felt her weak pulse. Whatever was happening to her, it was serious. He turned to the soldiers. "We need to take her to the lab. Now," he said firmly. Captain Rayner hesitated. "She could be dangerous, or she could be dying," Ethan snapped back. After a long pause, Rayner gave a sharp nod. "Fine, but if she tries anything, we end her." The soldiers carefully lifted the alien woman onto a hover stretcher and rushed her to the research facility. A shocking discovery. Inside the medical bay, bright lights flickered as Ethan and his team worked quickly. They attached monitors to the alien's body, scanning her vital signs. Her heart rate was unstable, her temperature fluctuating rapidly. The scans revealed something shocking. Her DNA was changing. "She's transforming." Dr. Lyon, Ethan's assistant, whispered in disbelief. Ethan stared at the screen. The alien woman's genetic structure was in flux. Strange new sequences were appearing, ones that looked very familiar. These sequences, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. "They're human." Dr. Lyon's eyes widened. "That's impossible. How can an alien's DNA suddenly start turning human?" Before Ethan could respond, the alien woman gasped and bolted upright on the medical bed. The monitors beeped wildly. Her breathing was ragged, her eyes wide with shock. "I feel," she whispered, gripping the sides of the bed. Her voice trembled with emotion. Something Zenari were never supposed to have. Ethan took a cautious step closer. "What do you feel?" She looked at him, and for the first time in her life, an alien being from a superior race felt something she never should have felt. "Fear," she whispered. A cold chill ran down Ethan's spine. Why was she feeling emotions? What was happening to her? Before they could question further, the emergency alarm blared. An alert flashed on the control screen. A distress signal had been activated from her ship. Someone, or something, was coming for her. The shocking transformation begins. The medical bay was silent except for the rhythmic beeping of monitors. The alien woman, Soraya, sat on the examination bed, her silver-white skin glistening under the harsh fluorescent lights. Her golden eyes, once sharp and emotionless, now flickered with something foreign, fear, confusion, and something even she didn't understand. Ethan watched her carefully. The scan still displayed the impossible. Her DNA was changing, mutating, becoming more human. Soraya raised a trembling hand to her face. Her breath was uneven, her chest rising and falling in ways that felt unnatural to her. Zenari did not breathe like this. Their bodies were designed for efficiency, without the weakness of human emotions. Yet, as she sat there, struggling to steady herself, she felt something alien, not to Ethan, but to her. Emotion. Ethan took a slow step forward. "Soraya, do you feel pain?" She looked up at him sharply, her expression unreadable. Pain. Her voice was smooth, but had an edge of uncertainty. He nodded. Pain. Discomfort. Anything unusual inside you? Her hands clenched into fists. Her body was betraying her, changing without her control. She felt something, but it wasn't just pain. It was deeper. It was wrong. "I do not understand," she whispered. Ethan glanced at the monitor again. The genetic shift was accelerating. Her alien biology was breaking down, restructuring itself into something new, something that should not be possible. And then, the real transformation began. A sudden change. Soraya gasped, gripping her sides as a sudden wave of dizziness struck her. Her vision blurred, her body feeling heavier, weaker. She could feel the energy inside her shifting, pulsing like a foreign heartbeat. Her reflection on the metallic table caught her eye, and what she saw shocked her to her core. Her once perfect Zenari skin, smooth, metallic, flawless, had begun to shift. Faint traces of imperfections were appearing. Small lines, slight changes in texture, human-like features. Her golden eyes widened as she ran her fingers over her own face. The smooth alien perfection was fading, replaced with something softer, warmer, weaker. "No," she whispered. Her breathing quickened. Panic swelled in her chest. "This is not possible." Ethan stepped closer. "Soraya, listen to me." "No." She jerked away, her movements unsteady. She felt fragile, something she had never felt before. Zenari were strong, durable, superior. Yet now, her own body was failing her. She turned to Ethan, her glowing eyes filled with something terrifyingly human. Uncertainty. "What is happening to me?" Ethan hesitated, unsure how to explain something even science couldn't answer. "Your DNA. It's shifting. Your body is changing." Soraya pressed her hands against her chest. She could feel her own heartbeat. Zenari had perfect circulatory systems, regulated, controlled. But now, her heartbeat was irregular, faster, weaker, human. She clenched her fists. "I need to contact my people." Ethan tensed. "That's not a good idea." Soraya narrowed her eyes. "You do not understand. If they find out what is happening to me, they will." The alarms blared. A red warning flashed across the monitor. Unauthorized transmission detected. Ethan spun toward the screen. What the? Before he could finish, Soraya's ship, still lying in the crash zone, suddenly activated itself. Its damaged systems sparked to life, a distress signal pulsing across space. Soraya staggered back, realization hitting her like a blade. "They're coming." The Zenari response. Far above the human colony, deep in the black void of space, something stirred. A massive Zenari warship hung in the darkness, its sleek obsidian structure blending into the void. Inside, Commander Vex, a towering figure with cold, merciless eyes, stood before a glowing console. A signal pulsed in front of him, the distress call from Soraya's ship. "Soraya," he muttered, his tone void of emotion. "What have you done?" Beside him, a Zenari officer studied the data, His expression remained blank, but there was a flicker of something beneath the surface. "She is mutating," the officer stated. "Her biological patterns are shifting. The data suggests." He hesitated. Vex turned to him sharply. "Suggests what?" The officer's voice was almost disbelieving. "It suggests she is turning human." For the first time, Vex's cold expression faltered. There was silence. Then, in a voice as sharp as steel, he said, "Prepare the fleet. If she is corrupted, she must be erased." Back on Lumen 5, Soraya sat on the edge of the medical bed, her mind racing. The weight of realization crushed her. She was no longer Zanari. Not completely. She could feel it in the way her heartbeat quickened, in the way fear tightened her chest. She had always believed emotions were a weakness, that the Zanari were beyond such primitive things. But now she wasn't so sure. Ethan stood beside her. He could see the turmoil in her eyes. "Soraya, you need to decide. If your people come and find you like this, will they help you, or will they kill you?" Soraya swallowed hard. The answer was clear. "They will not help me," she admitted. "They will destroy me." She clenched her jaw. Her entire life, she had been told that Zanari were superior, perfect, unbreakable. But now she was proof that wasn't true. Ethan exhaled. "Then we need to find a way to stop them." Soraya turned to him, her newly human heart pounding in her chest. For the first time, she felt something completely unfamiliar, not just fear. Hope. But as the sky above them shimmered with the arrival of the Zanari fleet, she realized something else. Hope wouldn't be enough. She would have to fight. A forbidden connection. The sky above Lumen 5 shimmered with an eerie glow. The deep, unsettling hum filled the air as the Zanari warship loomed above the colony, its shadow stretching across the barren landscape. The sleek, black vessel hovered with ominous precision, its weapons primed, its scanners locked onto one target. Soraya. Inside the medical bay, Soraya stood motionless, staring at the control screen. Her golden eyes reflected the flashing red alerts, but she barely noticed them. Something else had consumed her. Something impossible. She could feel. Her fingers trembled as she ran them over her arm, over the skin that was no longer entirely Zanari. The smooth, metallic perfection of her kind had faded. Her once pristine complexion now bore imperfections, softness, warmth, subtle variations in color. She turned her hands over, examining her fingertips, her nails, the way they moved, the way they felt. Zanari did not feel. Zanari did not change. Yet here she was, changing, feeling, becoming something else. Ethan stood a few feet away, his arms crossed, watching her. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were filled with something strange. Understanding. For the first time, Soraya saw a human not as an inferior being, but as something she was now connected to. She hated it. She feared it. But most terrifying of all, she didn't want it to stop. An unthinkable truth. A sudden, sharp pain tore through her chest. She gasped, stumbling forward. Ethan rushed to her side, catching her before she fell. "Soraya," he said urgently, "what's happening?" She struggled to breathe, her vision blurring. Every pulse of her heart felt different, louder, more fragile, more real. Then it hit her. She wasn't just changing physically. She was changing mentally, emotionally. She looked up at Ethan, her breathing ragged. Before she could finish, a voice filled the room. Seray. The voice was deep, emotionless, powerful. It rang through the colony's speakers, transmitted from the warship above. Soraya's body stiffened. She knew that voice. "Commander Vex. Soraya of the Zanari Empire," the voice continued. "You have been identified as compromised. Surrender immediately. Submit to cleansing." Cleansing. She knew what that meant. The Zanari did not tolerate weakness. They did not tolerate failure. and they certainly did not tolerate contamination. She had no doubt. If she returned to them, they would erase her. Every trace of her transformation, every piece of this humanity. They would destroy her mind, her body, her existence. Soraya clenched her fists. She had spent her entire life believing the Zenari were superior, that they were beyond human flaws. But now she saw the truth. The Zenari feared humanity, not because humans were weak, but because humans were something they could never be. Free. A choice that cannot be undone. Ethan's voice was quiet but firm. You can't go back to them. Soraya turned to him, conflict raging in her mind. Her people, her duty, her identity. And yet, she could feel the weight of his words inside her. Her emotions, new, overwhelming, told her something she never would have admitted before. She didn't want to go back. She didn't want to be erased. But running meant war. It meant becoming an enemy of her own people. It meant a sudden explosion shook the ground. The colony trembled as the Zenari deployed soldiers. Through the observation window, Soraya saw them. Tall, armored warriors, moving with mechanical precision. Their weapons glowed with energy powerful enough to reduce a human to ash in seconds. Ethan grabbed her arm. We have to go. Now. Soraya didn't move. She was still frozen by one terrifying realization. She was afraid. Zenari did not fear. Zenari did not run. But she wasn't just Zenari anymore. She wasn't one of them. Not anymore. A sharp voice crackled over the colony speakers. Soraya, Commander Vex repeated. This is your final chance. Soraya looked at Ethan, her golden eyes burning with a mix of defiance and uncertainty. For the first time in her life, she had a choice. And she chose to run. The escape. Alarms blared as Soraya and Ethan rushed through the colony corridors. Soldiers fought to hold back the Zenari invaders, but it was a losing battle. The Zenari were stronger, faster, relentless. Ethan pulled Soraya into a maintenance tunnel. There's a transport ship in the eastern sector. If we can reach it, we can. A blast of energy ripped through the corridor, barely missing them. The walls shattered, sending debris flying. Soraya turned sharply, her Zenari instincts kicking in. She moved before she could think, her body reacting faster than human speed. She grabbed Ethan, pushing him out of the way as another blast narrowly missed his head. They landed behind cover, breathing heavily. Ethan stared at her. That was insanely fast. Soraya ignored him, peering over the debris. 3 Zenari soldiers approached, scanning the area. Their eyes, emotionless, cold, searched for her. Her own people, hunting her. Ethan whispered, How do we get past them? Soraya didn't answer. Instead, she closed her eyes, felt the change within her. And for the first time, she didn't fight it. Instead of pushing away her new emotions, she embraced them. Her fear, her desperation, even her hope. She had spent her entire life being told Zenari were perfect because they didn't feel. But now, she knew the truth. Emotions didn't make her weak. They made her stronger. The Zenari soldiers stepped closer. Soraya opened her eyes. And then, she attacked. The Zenari invasion begins. The colony of Lumen 5 trembled under the weight of the Zenari invasion. The sky, once vast and infinite, now pulsed with the eerie glow of the Zenari warship. Its black surface seemed to absorb light, a silent predator waiting to strike. Soraya and Ethan ran through the crumbling corridors, alarms wailing around them. The colony's defenses were failing. The Zenari were too strong, too precise, too ruthless. Ethan gasped for breath as they reached a service tunnel, his heart pounding. We can't fight them, Soraya, he said between breaths. They'll wipe this colony off the map just to get to you. Soraya clenched her fists. She knew he was right. But she also knew something he didn't. The Zenari wouldn't stop here. If they deemed her transformation a contamination, they would hunt every human in the galaxy to ensure it never happened again. She was the proof that Zenari could change, that they could become something more, and that terrified them. A loud explosion rocked the ground beneath them. Dust and debris rained from the ceiling as Ethan stumbled. Soraya caught him, steadying him with ease. Her grip was firm, her alien strength still present despite the humanization of her body. "They're coming," she whispered. Ethan looked at her, seeing something different in her golden eyes. Not just fear, not just survival. A choice had been made inside her. Soraya was no longer running. She was ready to fight. The Zenari attack. Outside, the colony's last line of defense collapsed. The energy barriers flickered and died as the Zenari warriors marched forward. They moved in perfect formation, their metallic armor gleaming under the moonlight. Their weapons pulsed with high-frequency plasma energy, designed to disintegrate anything on impact. At the front of the army, Commander Vex stood tall, his gaze locked on the settlement ahead. His face remained unreadable, but deep within, he felt something unsettling. Doubt. Soraya's transformation was impossible. And yet, the data did not lie. She was changing, becoming one of them. Vex's grip tightened around his weapon. If such contamination spread, if others began to feel, to evolve, it would mean the end of the Zenari way. That could not happen. He raised a single hand. Burn it down. The order was final. Soraya's awakening. Inside the colony, Soraya and Ethan emerged from the tunnels, stepping into the open battlefield. What they saw made Ethan's blood run cold. The entire Zenari army stood at the edge of the settlement, their weapons trained, ready to erase every living thing in their path. And leading them, Vex. Soraya took a slow step forward, her eyes locked on him. Even from this distance, she could hear his voice, a telepathic link, forged by their shared genetics. "You are an abomination, Soraya." His voice echoed in her mind, sharp as a blade. "You will submit, or you will perish." Soraya's heart pounded, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from defiance. For the first time in her existence, she wasn't just following orders. She wasn't just accepting her fate. She was choosing it. Ethan gritted his teeth. "Soraya, we can't win this. They'll slaughter everyone." Soraya turned to him, and for the first time, she smiled. "Not if I show them the truth." A dangerous gamble. Soraya stepped forward, walking towards the Zenari army. The colony's survivors gasped in shock, watching as she approached the enemy. The Zenari raised their weapons. The plasma barrels hummed, ready to fire on sight. But Soraya wasn't afraid. She let them see her, not just as a Zenari, not just as a human, but as something new. She extended her hand, and suddenly, the air around her shimmered. A pulse of energy radiated outward, not a weapon, but a signal, a direct telepathic broadcast to every Zenari soldier on the battlefield. And in that moment, they felt it. Everything. The fear, the doubt, the emotion she had been trying to suppress, but also the strength, the power of choice. For the first time in Zenari history, a wave of uncertainty passed through the ranks. Soldiers hesitated. Some lowered their weapons. Soraya's transformation wasn't just a mutation. It was an evolution. Vex's rage. Vex's eyes burned with fury. He could feel it, the ripple of change moving through his forces. He had underestimated the contamination. This wasn't just about Soraya anymore. It was about every Zenari who had just felt something they weren't supposed to feel. He could not allow this. With a snarl, Vex raised his hand. A pulse of black energy erupted from his body, slamming into Soraya. She screamed. Her body convulsed as the Zenari genetic failsafe activated, a biological kill switch meant to erase corrupted Zenari from existence. Ethan watched in horror as Soraya fell to her knees, gasping in pain. "No." He sprinted forward, grabbing her as her body trembled violently. "Soraya, stay with me." She opened her eyes, and for the first time, Tears rolled down her face. Zenari did not cry, but Soraya was no longer just Zenari. She reached up, her fingers barely touching Ethan's face, and whispered something so soft, so human, that it shattered every truth she had ever known. "I don't want to die." Ethan's grip tightened around her. "Then don't." With a roar, Soraya unleashed everything inside her. A pulse of pure energy exploded from her core, knocking back the Zenari army. The ground cracked beneath her, the air humming with raw power. Her body lifted off the ground, the pain fading as something new awakened inside her. Not Zenari. Not human. Something beyond both. She turned to Vex, her golden eyes burning with a fire he had never seen before. And in that moment, the war truly began. The ultimate betrayal. The battlefield stood still. A war that should have been swift and brutal had suddenly transformed into something unthinkable. The Zenari soldiers hesitated, gripping their weapons with uncertain hands. For the first time in their existence, they were feeling something. Doubt, fear, choice. And it was all because of her. Soraya hovered above the battlefield, golden energy crackling around her transformed body. She was neither fully Zenari nor fully human. She had become something new. A fusion of two species, a bridge between two worlds. Her heart pounded as she looked at her people, the ones she had once called her own. Their perfect discipline was breaking. Their flawless obedience was crumbling. But one figure still stood tall, unwavering, his piercing gaze locked onto her. Commander Vex. His expression was one of pure rage, not just anger, but something deeper. Fear, because he knew what she represented. Soraya was proof that the Zenari could change. And if that change spread, their entire empire would fall. Vex stepped forward, his armored boots crushing the cracked earth beneath him. His voice rang through the air, amplified by the Zenari's telepathic network. Enough. A shockwave of dark energy burst from his body, rippling outward. The moment it hit the Zenari soldiers, their hesitation vanished. Their bodies stiffened, their eyes darkening, their expressions walled out. The moment of weakness had passed. They were under his control once more. Soraya's chest tightened. She had felt them wavering. She had almost reached them. But now, Vex had restored their minds to cold, unwavering obedience. And she was alone again, captured. Before she could react, a dozen energy blasts struck her. Pain exploded through her body as she was sent crashing to the ground. The impact sent cracks through the earth, dust and debris rising around her. Ethan shouted her name, but before he could reach her, he was thrown back by an invisible force. Vex raised a hand, and instantly, Soraya was lifted into the air, her body frozen in place by an unseen force. She gasped, struggling, but she was too weak. The battle, the transformation, it had drained her. Vex walked toward her slowly, his eyes burning with cold fury. "You are no longer Zenari," he said. His voice was calm, but filled with venom. "You are an infection, a disease, and I will erase you." Soraya's breath came in ragged gasps, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. "You're afraid of me," she whispered. For a split second. Just a fraction of a moment. Vex hesitated. Then his grip tightened, and Soraya screamed as dark energies surged into her. Her body convulsed, her vision fading in and out. The pain was unbearable. It felt like her very existence was being ripped apart. Ethan charged forward, ignoring the danger. "Let her go." A Zenari soldier struck him down. He hit the ground, coughing blood. Soraya's heart clenched at the sight. No, 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 no. Not like this. Not again. She had spent her entire life believing the Zenari way was the only way. That emotions were a weakness. That humans were inferior. But now, as she watched Ethan, a human who had risked everything for her, she knew the truth. Love wasn't weakness. Compassion wasn't weakness. The real weakness was blind obedience, and she would not obey anymore. The betrayal. Just as she felt herself slipping into unconsciousness, a new energy erupted from within her. The golden glow of her transformation flared once more, pushing back against Vex's hold. For the first time in his life, Vex stumbled backward. The Zenari gasped. Their leader had never shown weakness before. Soraya fell to the ground, gasping for breath. Every part of her body screamed in pain, but she pushed through it. She lifted her head, her glowing eyes locking onto Vex. "You're wrong," she whispered. "I'm not the disease. I'm the cure." The Zenari soldiers hesitated again. Even under Vex's control, they felt something shifting. They had never seen a Zenari defy their leader. They had never seen a Zenari survive his attacks. Vex's expression darkened. "You have made your choice," he said coldly. "Now watch as your humanity destroys you." He raised his hand again. And then, suddenly, a Zenari soldier turned on him. Soraya's eyes widened as one of Vex's own warriors stepped between them, shielding her. "What are you doing?" Vex demanded. His voice was sharp, deadly. The soldier trembled, as if fighting against his own programming. His body shook, his weapon clattering to the ground. And then, in a broken, shaky voice, he spoke. "She is not wrong." The battlefield fell into complete silence. Vex's eyes burned with rage. "This ends now." With a single movement, he struck the rebel Zenari, disintegrating him on the spot. Soraya screamed as the soldier vanished into ash. The message was clear. No one defied the Zenari. No one defied Vex. The army stood still, watching, waiting. The hesitation was still there, but fear still ruled them. And that fear made them Vex's slaves. Soraya's fists clenched. Enough. She rose to her feet, her entire body glowing. She had tried to reason with them. She had tried to show them a better way. But now she was done playing by their rules. She turned to Ethan, who was struggling to his feet. Their eyes met. "We have to stop him," she said. Ethan wiped blood from his lips. "Yeah," he said, his voice hoarse. "No kidding." Soraya turned back to Vex, her stance firm. "I will not run anymore." Vex's expression was unreadable. But for the first time, he did not look certain of his victory. "This war ends tonight," Soraya said. And with that, the final battle began. The battle for humanity. The air crackled with tension. The battlefield stood frozen. A moment of stillness before the storm. Soraya stood in the center, her golden energy pulsing like a living sun around her. The last remnants of her Zenari form were gone, replaced by something new. She was no longer Zenari, no longer human. She was evolution itself. Across from her, Commander Vex stared with cold, murderous intent. His tall, armored form radiated raw power, but beneath his controlled expression, there was doubt. For the first time, he was facing something he could not predict. The Zenari army stood behind him, silent, waiting for orders. Their programming demanded obedience. But Soraya had planted something inside them. A question. A tiny crack in their perfect control. A flicker of doubt. Vex clenched his fists, his black energy swirling like a storm around him. "This ends now," he growled. And then, the war erupted. The final battle begins. The Zenari soldiers attacked first, their precision devastating. Energy blasts rained down, disintegrating entire buildings in seconds. The human colony was no match for the advanced invaders. Ethan ducked behind a wrecked transport vehicle as a plasma shot narrowly missed his head. "Damn it! We can't win this," he shouted over the chaos. Soraya did not run. She stepped forward, hands raised, and unleashed her power. A shockwave of golden light expanded outward, slamming into the Zenari forces. The energy wasn't just an attack, it was a message. Every Zenari it touched felt something unfamiliar. Emotion. Choice. free will. Some dropped their weapons instantly, gasping as their minds awakened. Others resisted, but their movements became uncertain, slower, weaker. The battlefield fractured. Zenari were turning on Zenari. Vex's eyes burned with fury. He could feel his control slipping. "This is your fault," he snarled at Soraya. He launched himself forward, his black energy colliding with her golden light. Their powers clashed violently, sending shockwaves through the battlefield. Soraya gritted her teeth, holding her ground. "You can't stop this, Vex," she said through clenched teeth. Vex's voice was filled with pure rage. "I am the Zenari. We do not change. We do not feel." Soraya's golden eyes blazed. "Then you are already extinct." The turning point. The battle raged on. Ethan fought alongside the rebels, dodging energy blasts and leading survivors to safety. Soraya and Vex's fight was on another level. They moved faster than the eye could track, blurs of golden and black light clashing in the sky. Vex struck first, his energy ripping through Soraya's defenses. She crashed into the ground, creating a massive crater. Ethan ran toward her, panic rising. "Soraya!" She staggered to her feet, blood dripping from the corner of her mouth. Vex landed in front of her, unscathed. His cold, expressionless face made her stomach turn. "Look at you," he said. "We were made to be perfect. But you have let yourself become weak." Soraya wiped the blood from her lip, breathing heavily. "You're wrong," she said. This is what makes me stronger." She raised her hand, and for the first time, she did not fight her emotions. She let them flow through her. Her pain, her fear, her hope. And in that moment, her power exploded. A golden storm engulfed the battlefield, washing over every Zenari, every soldier, every survivor. And suddenly, they felt. Every Zenari on the battlefield gasped, their minds unlocking. They clutched their heads, staggering, shaking, realizing they had been slaves their entire existence. Vex's eyes widened. No, this is not possible. The end of Vex. Vex lunged forward in desperation, his energy forming a deadly black blade. He struck, but Soraya caught it. For the first time, he saw true power. Not in violence, not in control, but in freedom. Soraya's golden energy overpowered him, surging through his body. For the first time, Vex felt emotions. And for the first time, he was afraid. The energy engulfed him, consuming him completely. His body trembled, cracks forming in his once invincible armor. Soraya met his gaze one final time. "Goodbye, Vex." And with that, he was gone. A new beginning. The battle was over. The Zenari, who had once been mindless warriors, now stood in silence, their expressions filled with emotion for the first time. Some wept. Some simply stood in shock, unable to comprehend what had happened. And then, one by one, they kneeled. Not in submission, but in gratitude. Soraya looked around at them, then at Ethan. His face was covered in dirt, his hands bruised, but his smile was pure. "You did it," he said. She shook her head. "No, we did." Ethan smirked. "So, what now?" Soraya turned her gaze toward the sky. A new future lay ahead. A future where Zenari and humans could coexist, where free will and choice would shape destiny, not blind obedience. She had once believed her emotions made her weak. Now she knew. They made her unstoppable. And as the sun rose over the battlefield, illuminating the broken land, she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. A new beginning. The battlefield was silent. The war that should have destroyed everything had ended not with the destruction of a species, but with its rebirth. The Zenari soldiers who once stood in unwavering ranks of perfect obedience were now free. They looked at their own hands, their own bodies, feeling emotions they had never known. Wonder, confusion, fear, hope. The dawn light bathed the ruined colony in gold and crimson. Fires still burned, the wreckage of war scattered across the land. But there was no more fighting. There was only change. Soraya's last battle. Soraya stood at the center of it all, her body aching from the battle, her heart still pounding. The energy that had once raged inside her was now calm, controlled. For the first time in her life, she felt truly whole. But there was one final task left to do. Ethan walked beside her, wiping blood from his forehead. His uniform was torn, his hands scraped and bruised, but he grinned through the exhaustion. "So, what now?" he asked, gesturing to the Zenari soldiers who were still stunned by their sudden transformation. Some were shaking. Others were speaking to each other in hushed, uncertain tones. "They'd never had emotions before," Soraya said softly. "They don't know what to do with them." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Yeah, well, welcome to being human." Soraya gave a small smile, but deep down, she knew the truth. The Zenari were no longer mindless followers, but that didn't mean they knew how to be leaders. She turned to them, raising her voice. "You are free now," she said, her words carrying across the ruined colony. "No one controls you anymore. You must choose your own path." A silence fell over them. Then, slowly, one Zenari stepped forward. A woman, her silver-blue skin marred by battle scars, looked at Soraya with something akin to reverence. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice shaking. We don't know how to live like this." Soraya felt their fear. They had been created as warriors, their lives dictated by orders, their minds trained to obey. Now, suddenly, they had to think for themselves. She knew what that felt like. She had lived it. And now she had to help them live it too. The last choice. Soraya stepped forward. "You will learn," she told them. "It won't be easy, but you are no longer just weapons. You are no longer slaves." She looked up at the Zenari warship still hovering in the sky. It was empty now, its crew having abandoned their posts, unsure of what to do without orders. A massive fleet, once a symbol of conquest, was now a relic of a past that no longer existed. She took a deep breath. "There is more to life than war," she said, turning back to the Zenari. "You must decide what kind of people you want to become." The scared soldier nodded slowly. Then, one by one, the Zenari knelt. Not in submission, but in a silent vow. A vow that they would not return to their old ways. A vow that they would not let their past define them. A vow that they would choose their own future. The farewell. Ethan sighed, crossing his arms. "So, you gonna stick around?" Soraya turned to him. For the first time, she didn't know the answer. She had fought her entire life for a purpose that was now gone. She had been a soldier, a scout, a warrior. Now she was something else. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't know where I belong." Ethan smirked. "Sounds human to me." Soraya laughed softly. A real, honest laugh. She never imagined she would feel so light. But there was one last thing to do. She walked over to the Zenari warship, placing her hand on its control panel. The screen flickered to life, displaying a galactic map. 1,000 planets, 1,000 stars, 1,000 possibilities. She turned back to the others. "There are more Zenari out there," she said. "More who are still controlled, more who don't know the truth." The scared soldier nodded. "We will find them." Soraya hesitated. Then she made her decision. "I will go with you," she said. "I have to." Ethan's face fell slightly, but he nodded. "I figured you'd say that." He looked at her, something soft and unspoken in his eyes. "You know," he said, "for an alien, you turned out okay." Soraya smirked. "For a human, you're not bad either." A new journey. The sun had fully risen now, painting the sky in warm hues. Soraya boarded the Zenari warship, standing on the edge of a future that was hers to shape. She looked back one last time. At Ethan. At the colony. at the home she had found in the most unexpected of places. Then, with a deep breath, she turned away. The ship's engines roared to life, lifting off into the vast unknown. She didn't know where this journey would take her, but for the first time, she was excited to find out.